So what I had planned for tonight, as you see, I have all 7 books here. I'm going to call it the Comprehensive Ottolenghi. There will be 2 intermissions. No, just kidding. I'd like to start with some things at the very beginning. I was first introduced to Yotam by a friend who knows my love for making hummus and said, you should check out this hummus recipe. And it's better than yours. And I did, and I was blown away. And that thing you do with the baking soda to the beans, how did that come about?
I don't really remember, because that book was published a good 5 or 6 years ago, and we did a lot of testing I'm kind of an obsessive recipe tester. If I have nothing better to do, I go and test a recipe in the kitchen. And that recipe for hummus, with hummus, you want to make sure that a good one would have you want to get rid of as much of the skins as you can. So when you kind of mix them with bicarbonate of soda, you create friction, and the skins break, and many of them come to the surface, and then you can scoop out the skins, and you get a really smooth hummus. But I don't quite remember how. We never invent anything, chefs. We just collect ideas from other people, and that's how. But I don't know who gave us the tip.
So where do you stand on like artichoke hummus and all these flavored things, which I find, no.
No.
Yeah.
So you know what? I used to be a real purist when it came to hummus, because as I used to go to the supermarket and see like beet hummus and all those hummus things, and it really used to annoy me. But then I started doing it to other people, and playing with their foods, because that's what I do. Like a few years ago, I published a recipe in The Guardian for my husband. He's Irish, so I did an Irish column, and one of the recipes that I published was for Irish stew, my way, and I started adding things. So I added grated orange skin and some parsley and a few other aromatics. And under the column, there was people just got really angry. They said, "What are you doing? Like, Irish stew is just mutton and potatoes and water. Like, who wants to eat that?" So I understood all of a sudden that if you are going to be a purist about something, then it's really not that very playful. So, for someone who kind of always plays with recipes, if I would take the approach that you can't call it hummus unless it's one thing, then I would have to kind of follow up with the way I behave, and then I won't be very consistent. So now I allow everything to be hummus.
We could talk about hummus all night.
Yes, we could. Yeah.
For me. But I want to go back to the very beginning, very early in your career, Yotam. What did your parents want you to be?
My parents are. My mom was a head. A principal in a school, and my dad was a professor. So I think they wanted me to do something they wanted me to get a good education and to go to university, which I did. But I think their idea was that I would be something intellectual, and I tried, but I gave up that prospect after spending. I did my master's degree in comparative literature and philosophy, but the problem is I didn't stay in that field because I felt that there wasn't that kind of the gratification was anything but immediate. I remember when I handed my dissertation to my supervisor, I said to her, "Well, there you go," and I gave it to a few friends as well, and nobody ever read it or touched it, apart from her, I hope. And and then I remember when I said, "Okay, I'll try to be a chef," and I cooked meals for friends and family, and like as soon as you serve it, people are happy they're eating. You get like smile in the eyes and reactions, and it really struck me how different those two activities were. I ditched the world of academia and I stuck to cooking. Yeah.
And what kind of formal training did you have, if any?
I went to the Cordon Bleu in London in the 1990s, and I took a few courses there. And I trained mostly as a pastry chef, as a baker, and most of my career in professional kitchens was as a pastry chef. Last year's book was sweet. I was here with Helen, and that is kind of that's the collection of recipes of Helen and mine from many years of collaboration. But so I did that, and I started cooking professionally savory food only after I opened my cafe with Sami Tamimi and a couple of other partners in about 15 years ago.
I want to get to how you first met Sammy in a second, but to get back to, you started off as a pastry chef and then sort of broadened. I see pastries as precision cooking.
Yeah.
And some of the other stuff in your book is, one is like symphony and the other is jazz. You can, if you want more cumin, you can put more cumin in.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Talk about music and food a little bit. My dream would be to have a chef and a conductor here.
Well, that's not going to happen, but tonight, I mean. Well, I don't really think that's exactly right when it comes to the difference between baking and cooking is not exactly as you describe. I mean, there is some of it that is true, but in baking, yes, you need to learn a few basic recipes, but once you know them, you can actually play with the flavors and put things together. And the same applies for cooking. There are certain procedures that, like you were talking about hummus. I don't think, if you want to get it really right, you don't want to improvise too much. I mean, I was joking earlier when I said anything can be hummus, but to get a really, really good, authentic tasting, good hummus, you almost need to follow. I would follow the recipe almost to the T, because even though I don't need to measure, I can remember. It's really important to get a good result. So it's always chemistry, but with the cakes, more can go wrong if you get it wrong, so right. You kind of measure just to make sure that you don't. But I think it's closer than you think.
Can we play a little game with music for a second?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'm going to say a musical instrument, and I'd like you to describe a spice or a vegetable or an ingredient that matches it.
I've never played this game before.
All right. Neither have I. The violin.
The violin. Well, this is just much harder than I thought it would be. That needs to be something, maybe lemon or something quite kind of sharp and kind of that kind of gets under your skin.
The drums.
The drums. Those would be potatoes.
The saxophone.
Wow. Could that be a few things put together? Maybe the saxophone would be like a kind of a meze selection of things.
And then we'll end it with a bassoon.
A rutabaga.
Thanks for playing that game with me.
Pleasure. We can do it again tomorrow if you like.
Some of the first time after I found your hummus recipe, I had to find the book. And then I thought, oh, I'm going to cook something from this. And around noon, I went to the market and had guests coming for dinner. And
I know what's coming.
And I ended up having to go to 3 or 4 places. And I told them we were going to do the Ottolenghi dinner another night because I couldn't find black mustard seeds. They had brown, and I was trying to stick to the thing. Do you get a lot of criticism for that?
I get a lot of ironic looks. But the thing is, I mean, it's true, yes, there are a lot of ingredients in my recipes that are perceived to be maybe I don't like the word exotic because it really just reflects something about your state of mind or what you know or what you don't know, but are more hard to reach or to get, etc. But I want to remind a lot of people that mozzarella was kind of exotic like 20 years ago. You couldn't get it, or ricotta, or olives even, and now it's on every supermarket shelf in every shop. And so those things are really change and shift all the time. But the other thing, and I said it yesterday, so whoever was there yesterday, please forgive me. I've never been so pedantic about how much I make people use those particular ingredients. And I always say, oh, if you can't get this, offer substitutes. And often when you open a recipe and you see a long list of ingredients, like those poor mustard seeds that you couldn't find, it's not crucial. I mean, you think it has to be black, and it says black, but they could be yellow mustard seeds, and that's fine. But if it's, of course, if it's if the main ingredient is chicken, you don't have chicken, then you move on to the next page.
Yeah, you go to plenty more for that. Yeah.
But one spice less won't, change the management.
I have a cumin-related question. There's a cumin resistance in my household.
Really?
Yeah, and I sometimes have to divert traffic and say, could you open the window? And then when she's looking the other way. Are there any? Why do people sometimes pick on cumin
but there's a much worse candidate for that. It's fenugreek, because fenugreek is I love fenugreek, but when you cook something or roast something with fenugreek, the smell stays in the house for a week. It's incredible how persistent it is. So cumin is not the worst offender, but so why? I mean, it's the chemistry of the things. But I think cumin is actually, yes, there is a slight association with sweat. I think people have to make that connection. But it's one of my favorite spices, and I think, and cumin also is a very cross-cultural spice. You find cumin almost in every part of the world, and it's the spice I use the most in my cooking, because you can find it in South American cooking, in North African cooking, Middle Eastern, South Asia and Southeast Asia. It's everywhere because just because it's a great spice. So you need to kind of maybe go to therapy together and find a solution to that problem.
Hi, do you do any cumin therapy? Yeah. Let's get back to how you met. The beauty of your partnership with Sami Tamimi, I'm half Palestinian. And when I read the book, when I first got Jerusalem, what I thought was so beautiful about it is it had recipes, but it had stories. And at the end of the day, both sides seemed to have relatively the same stories.
Yeah.
And there was something beautiful about that. And it's a spirit that, you sort of feel we need a little more of these days. How did you meet Sami?
So Sami and I, actually, we go back a long way, but we didn't even know we did. So we were born in the same year, in the same city, only about, I don't know, probably a few miles away from each other. But we actually met in London in 1998 or 1999 when I applied for a job in a bakery where he was already working. And I remember when it was a beautiful bakery in Knightsbridge, and I was really drawn by all the food and the pastries and the breads that were in the window. I thought it was the most beautiful place. And I walked in with my CV. I wanted to ask for a job, but the manager wasn't there. So Sami was in the front cooking, and I said to him, could you pass this on to the manager? And he said yes. And then we just sparked a conversation. And we spoke for about 15 minutes before I asked him, where are you from? And he said, oh, I'm from Jerusalem. And I said, well, you're kidding, I'm too. And we just started to track back our stories, our past, and not at that moment, because we we just became friends over time. And we had so many things in common. We knew people in common, but more deeply it was the flavors that really bound us together. And I think often when Sami and I sit and try something, there's not much you need to say in order to agree on, because sometimes we do interviews, people ask, don't you ever have like arguments about flavors? You know, do you always agree on a recipe? Because people don't always agree on what's delicious, on what's not, like you and your other half, right, about cumin. But we do, we actually do. We always kind of, oh yeah, that actually works, and that's very good. So this was kind of the basis of this friendship, and to this day we still taste a lot of food together, and mostly agree on everything. And Sami is at the moment he's working on a Palestinian cookbook, and I taste all the food because he does it in the same environment where I work, and I find it incredible that we always kind of have a really good conversation about food. We never fight.
Well, you let him know we'd like to have him on our stage.
I'm sure he'll come here. Yeah.
Great. You have young kids at home. Do they like your food?
That depends on the day, on the direction the wind blows. And so, yeah, sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. I think kids are quite unpredictable. And I find that they are, generally speaking, they're quite good eaters for their ages, but something that they like today, there's no guarantee they'd like tomorrow, and it's really frustrating. My husband does most of the cooking at home, so often I come and he's just prepared the most beautiful meal, and they go like, I'm not hungry. It's the most soul-destroying thing that can happen. You know, you kind of cook the whole afternoon, and then they just don't feel like it. It's very upsetting. I know parents in the room, I'm sure they can identify with that, but you just need to live with it. Because, with food fights, children always win because they've got much more willpower than adults. So when you try to force them to eat something or argue, you always lose. Really, I find, at least I lose.
So when you go out, the family, like, let's go out to eat, what sort of restaurant do you guys go to?
They like pizza, and so we go out and have that. Is that shocking? They like fish and chips, and we have, in our neighborhood, we have good fish and chips, so they like that. They can eat vegetables, like they eat broccoli and beans and things like that, but they don't really like salady things and things with herbs in them, and they don't like fresh tomatoes. They don't eat that. It's
but
weird.
Let's say you're traveling and you're in a city, you're on book tour, let's say, and you're in New York or London, some great city, and you're what do you crave? What restaurant do you want to go try?
Oh, actually, today I got my cravings completely satisfied because I had fried chicken. And I had tacos, and that's the thing. So I don't really love, when I travel, I don't want to go to fancy restaurants because I find the experiences are quite long, and I'm tired and exhausted. And actually, I get inspired by much more simple food than we just had tacos now at the backstage, and it was so good. That's what I want to eat when I'm on tour.
So we had Nigella Lawson here last year, and the day after, I guess the paparazzi followed her, and she was at In-N-Out Burger. You ever hit a burger every now and then?
I don't have paparazzi following me, so that's phew, that's good. That's a relief. Yeah, I do have burgers sometimes. Yeah, it's not my favorite food burger, but sometimes I do crave a burger, and then I have one. I feel like really I'm disappointing a lot of people here. I shouldn't be saying all this.
No. So you've done 7 books. We're going to start with the plenty. You've covered vegetarian. You've done desserts. You've done the Middle Eastern, Jerusalem book, and now simple. What's next? Somebody last night said, "What about Ottolenghi raw?"
Yeah, but the trouble with raw, I like to eat raw food sometimes, is that it doesn't really, there's very little to write. So Well, I'll give you the answer. Actually, the honest answer is that when I start working on a book, I don't always exactly know which way it's going to go. I mean, if it's a baking book, obviously these are different kind of recipes. But my next book will be veg focus, which is all my books are vegetable focus. But I'm kind of trying to work on it. So I'm collecting recipes at the moment, but I don't really have exactly the way it's going to work. And one of the things that I really love about writing a cookbook is that the process is quite unpredictable. I start with 30 or 40 recipes that I really love, and they are kind of the core, I call them, because they inform the process of writing the book. And they are really things that I really love to eat, and I taste recipes every day, lots of recipes, and that's what I do for a living. And some recipes are really memorable. So when I think of the next book, I say, oh, let's take like 40 really memorable dishes that I've cooked recently, and I put them in. And after that, I start to explore further by testing recipes and writing down, dividing into chapters, all these kind of things.
So what I'd like to do now is let's work through some slides.
I hope you don't give me more instruments.
Let's go there. That is the simple
beet bread.
Yeah, tell us about that.
So in sweet, we have a beet cake that is actually it's a recipe that I love cooking. I mean, beet has an obviously natural sweetness, but when you bake with it and it cooks down, like when you things that are naturally sweet, when you cook them, you get more layers of sweetness, and that's what happened with that beet cake, and it's got ginger in it. It was one of my favorite recipes. So the conversation that we had at my test kitchen is, let's turn that into something savory. So we created that beet bread, and I think it's the only. Oh no, there's another bread in the book. There's a cornbread, but it takes a long time to cook. It takes well over an hour, but once it's done, it's really good, and it's got goat's cheese in it. So when you cut through, you see, I think there's a bit there and some seeds. It's lovely. I don't need to convince you. I don't need to say any more, right?
And then this one is the braised eggs with leeks and za'atar.
Yeah. So this is I think the whole world has been converted to shakshuka now. So everywhere I go, I see shakshuka, and I'm not going to say I'm the first one to publish a recipe for shakshuka, but it definitely wasn't so popular 10 years ago, and it's a great thing because it's like the ultimate comfort food, eggs in a sauce. So this is a kind of a green version, and it's based on leeks. So it's got leeks and feta and za'atar, and it's one of those breakfast dishes that you could put together in like 20 minutes, because you just saute the leeks in butter and olive oil, and essentially it's just a case of putting some eggs inside and getting them to cook, and it's very satisfying. And it's got the za'atar, which is it's an ingredient that I've been pushing and promoting for many years. But in this case, you don't think naturally that would work. But you take a bowl and you mix some za'atar with olive oil, and you spoon that on top at the very end, and it gives that really beautiful herby flavor that comes from the za'atar. No, that's got a good story.
That's why we picked that one.
That's called the Bridget Jones salmon. And the reason why it's called Bridget Jones is because last year or the year before that, I can't remember now, there was the latest Bridget Jones film arrived at the cinemas, and someone called me and said, "You're in the film." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And they told me that in one of the scenes in the film, Bridget Jones' boyfriend, brings her a delivery from Ottolenghi. And he says, "Look, I brought you this. I think instead of going out, they're going to have like a date at home or something." And he says, "And I brought you this." And I didn't know it at all. Nobody knew about it. It wasn't a product placement. But he says, "I brought you this, and I've got this salad and this and that, and there's a salmon with caper and saffron salsa, which we never had on the menu." So I had to quickly go and create the recipe, and that's the one. That's the burrata. Um, Everybody loves burrata, right? It's so good. This is good for the raw book because you just eat it like that, but then and you don't need a recipe.
But tell the grilled grapes in this. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, the grilled grapes is a cool thing. So, if anyone has eaten in my restaurant Nopi in London, we always have burrata with a fruit because I discovered a few years ago, quite a few years ago, that burrata, with all its beautiful creaminess, that it kind of oozes cream when you open it up, works really, really well with fresh or grilled fruit, and we always have it on the menu. And this was just one of the iterations, but what I did is we grill the grapes and they become a bit smoky, which is really nice. You just put them on little skewers, put them on a pan, and get them smoky, and that's really all you need to do. And then you put that next to the burrata, and then some fennel seeds and oil that you spoon on top. And it's something that is, I like to say this dish is way more than the sum of its parts. You know, it's really magical because of the smoke and the sweet and the fattiness of the cheese. You feel like you're having much more than what the effort that you put into it. Everybody goes, that's a cauliflower salad. So, you know, I've got an obsession with cauliflower. I've been cooking cauliflower in every possible way. But now I really need to invent new ways with cauliflower because everybody cooks cauliflower. It's like it's cauliflower and Brussels sprouts and all those vegetables that were not very popular are really popular now. So I need to think really hard what to do. So in this particular recipe, what we do, and I really recommend doing it, half the cauliflower is grated and is raw, and the other half is roasted. And one of the secrets that most people don't know, that roasted cauliflower leaves are really delicious. So, the leaves go in the oven with half the cauliflower florets, and the others are grated. And then there is pomegranate seeds and pistachios and lemon mixed all together. And this is actually one of my favorite salads in the book.
Can you talk a little bit more about pistachio? You use a lot of pistachios.
Yeah. When I was growing up, we used to have a pistachio tree not far from where we were living. So I remember spending quite a lot of time under the pistachio trees. But it's quite tricky because when they start falling and coming off, they are not really that good to eat yet. They're kind of quite raw. So some nuts are nice raw, like walnuts are really nice when they're wet and raw, but pistachios are not. So you need to kind of let them sit and dry out a bit. But I love it, and what I love about pistachios is the color. You know, it just enlivens everything and lightens it up, and yeah, it's a favorite. That's on the cover, on the American cover, and that's. So, you know, I really love contrasts in food. So for me, one of the things that is like a requirement of a dish is that it's going to have some kind of tension in it, whether it's going to be textural or visual. But this one is about temperatures. So the yogurt is really cold. It's straight out of the fridge. That's the bottom layer. And it's just a thick yogurt, you know, full fat yogurt. Never buy a low fat yogurt, please. And it's got just some lemon zest grated into it. And on top, it's roasted cherry tomatoes. And the cherry tomatoes go under the grill with some oregano leaves and some oil. And it's really, really beautiful when they're super hot and sweet to go over the cold yogurt. It's amazing. You kind of eat with a pita. And yeah,
These are the Iranian...
the Iranian fritters. So, you know, in Persian food, herbs are not a garnish. They're like, you eat it as the main thing. You sit down for a meal. I've never been to Iran, but I have Iranian friends, and they showed me how it's done. And you sit down to a meal, and you get lots of raw vegetables, but you also get whole bunches of mint or dill or tarragon, and you just kind of eat it like it's the main thing. And I love that because it's so much flavor. So these are herb fritters. So it's essentially just a lot of herbs chopped up and just held together with some eggs. And it's something that really reminds me when I was growing up in Jerusalem, we used to get those and put them in a pita and kind of eat it as a kind of a lunch. It's very Palestinian as well. So this is a very intensely herby take on those kind of egg omelets that you stuff and eat on the way somewhere. I think these are also pistachios. These are the pistachio and lamb meatballs. They're served with a sumac yogurt. So sumac is mixed with oil and swirled through the yogurt. I don't know what to say. They're really good, actually. That's good for Thanksgiving. That's roasted butternut squash with lentils, red onion, and dolce latte. And that's a killer recipe. It's so good. And what is really nice about it is that if you put the cheese on the butternut and the lentils when they're still warm, it kind of slightly melts, which is so nice. So, I really, this is great at room temperature, but when it's warm, it's at its best. So you just, you can heat it up as well before you add the cheese, and you stick everything in the oven for a little bit and then put it out on a plate. And this is also, I want to say one more thing. It's a great example of how presenting food in a platter is so much nicer than in plates, because people always ask me, oh, what's your dinner party tip? And this is one of them, that things look better when they're presented in big platters or big bowls, and you kind of make an impact. It feels generous. So for me, that's that's the way I like to present things like that, like in abundance. That is an eggplant it's going to be controversial because it's got anchovies in the dressing, and not everybody likes anchovy, but whoever likes anchovy likes it very much. So it's a dressing of walnuts and anchovies, and when the eggplants come out of the oven all roasted, you spoon that on top, and they soak up all these beautiful umami flavors, and then you don't need to do anything. You just put some herbs on top, and I know many people identify my cooking with eggplants, and if you're willing to be brave, try that, and you'll see it's as good as all the others.
Speaking of eggplant, going back to the musical instruments, where do you see the eggplant?
That will have to be the cello.
Cello.
Yeah. This is a schnitzel. I mean, anyone who grew up in Israel know that there's nothing else to eat but schnitzel in the average household. This is what you get. And but this is a kind of a posh schnitzel because not just breadcrumbs, it's got a whole lot of seeds. And this is something that I cook for my children, and this is kind of children-friendly food. Everybody loves a schnitzel, right? It's a chicken schnitzel. It's not a veal schnitzel. So, yeah.
So the next one, Yotam, French fries?
French fries my way.
Okay.
So this is a dish that I learned how to cook in Australia because I was doing some work there last year, and there's an Australian chef called George Columbaris. He's from a Greek background, and I've actually copied this from him. But Nigella did it too, so it's in her book as well. Both of us are friends with George, and this is the only dish that we have overlapping between our books. And the potato is roasted, it's not fried, but there's a lot of oil there. And when it comes out of the oven, it gets a lot of dried oregano, how do you say it? Oregano. And then it's mixed with oregano and feta and fried garlic. And these are the best French fries you'll ever have, Greek fries you'll ever have.
Before we go to questions from the audience, I have a couple more questions I want to ask you. Food critics, how do you feel about criticism of restaurants?
So, for someone who has restaurants, I don't yearn for them to come to my restaurant. But if they do come and you get a good, you get a good review of your restaurants, then it's obviously I'm very happy. The one thing I have to say is that the risk, they need to take their job seriously. Like in Britain, we have some food critics. They only come like once for like and try like 3 things, and they draw all sorts of conclusions. But here, I think they work with a bit more integrity. So they come once or twice at least, and so I prefer American food critics to British food critics in general. But yeah, that's.
I love the color coding scheme you have here. These
Oh
little-
yeah, I wanted to talk about that.
tell us about that.
So yeah, when this book, this is about simple, and when we started to work on this book, myself and Esme and Tara, who are my co-authors on this book, we really tried to understand what it is like. So if something that is easy for me is not necessarily easy for you, and vice versa, and we tried to figure out what makes people say that a dish is easy or simple for them. So we started asking people, what's your ideal easy cooking? And the answers were actually quite different. Like some people would say, oh, I don't want to spend a lot of time in the kitchen, so I want to cook something like within 20 minutes. And other people said, oh, I just hate the shopping. I don't want to go shopping. And other people said, I want to make everything from my pantry, that's the same as shopping. So they came up with all sorts of different explanations. So we took that and we took all the recipes in the book and we tried to assign them to different kinds of cooks. So a recipe could be simple in 6 ways. So we use the word simple as an acronym. So S stands for short on time. So any recipe that has an S would take less than 30 minutes to make. The I stands for ingredients 10 or less. The M stands for make ahead, all the dishes that you can prepare in advance. The P stands for pantry, pantry dishes. The L stands for lazy. And those are dishes that you can be lazy because all the work is done for you. It's like a stew, you put it all in the pot and you come back after a couple of hours and it's done, or roast. And the E stands for easier than you think. And those are recipes that you look at and you go, I'm never going to make that, like ice cream or bread or something that some people would just, no, I don't, it's too complicated for me. But actually, if you read through it, it's much easier than that. So every recipe in the book is simple in one or more of these ways. And the color codes are just saying, so if you're a make-ahead kind of person, you just want to, people are coming over for dinner tomorrow night and you just want to make sure that everything I can make tonight, so I don't need to worry when they arrive and I'm jolly and happy and I can have a glass of wine. And then you want to choose all M recipes and make ahead. So that's how we complicated simple.
So let's talk about food porn for a second.
Food porn.
This happened last night at the dinner. The food came out, and immediately the iPhones are out. Everyone's taking pictures.
Yeah, I know. I do the same.
And you go to restaurants, the same thing is happening.
Yeah.
What's that doing to the experience of enjoying a meal?
It's a tricky one. So I can be critical, but I'm a culprit, so I do the same. And it's part of a bigger picture. Like we can't have an experience without documenting it. And I don't really have the solution to this problem. It's a big problem, but there is also upsides to this, and I often say that. Like the fact that a lot of people take pictures on their phones and share it on Instagram or wherever they share the pictures, it means that people can have conversations about food even if they don't share much else. So I find like there is a whole chef's language that's evolved over the last 10 or 15 years, which is completely international. We all know when you have René Redzepi talking about fermentation, we've been talking about fermentation for like 3 years, and that's the thing. And that is visual often because you can see people posting things all the time. And it is quite nice to see that there's a whole group of people, most of them are young, but some are older like myself, have a whole conversation going on, and they wouldn't be able to do it if they weren't taking pictures of their food, because reading so much is impossible. So it's a very easy way to conduct these conversations. So apart from spoiling meals, which I think that it does spoil a meal where you want to eat and someone says, well, hold on a minute, let me take a picture of your food, it has some upsides as well.
So we're going to go to questions in a second. One question I'm going to ask him because I know it's going to come up, and he's
About an instrument, right?
no, 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 no. It's a wrap on that. We're done with that. Ottolenghi in the United States. No, the last time you were here, 2 days later, I got an email from someone who is a venture capitalist, and he said, I know you have that Ottolenghi guy coming. If he's interested,
I've got the
we'd
money.
like to back him to open a restaurant.
The trouble
In
is,
California.
I was trying to address it last night, and I said, I'm never going to open a restaurant in LA. And people said, why not LA? And I said, no, it's nothing about LA. But the trouble is our style of management is very different from maybe other people. And I find it really difficult to imagine having a restaurant that is so far from where I am. And at the moment, everything is very easy. You know, I know I can go to, even if I'm not in every one of the restaurants every day, I know I can, which is a big thing, and I can go tomorrow or the day after and check the food and make sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to do. And so I sleep better at night. That's the main consideration, really. That's the main reason why I wouldn't open a restaurant in LA.
I will let the gentleman know that that's not going to happen. All right, we're going to go to
Not
questions.
for now,
Not for
maybe
now.
in the future.
We're going to go to questions from the audience. I like to always remind you that at Live Talks LA, questions typically start with a W or an H, sometimes a D. They are generally short. There is no such thing as a two-part question. And follow-up question privileges I have.
So
Can
many
you
rules.
talk about gastro diplomacy and like you talk about hummus and how hummus, there's ownership issues with that? Like, can food bring people together? And can you like experience someone else's culture by trying someone else's food?
Yeah, it's a really tricky and a very topical question about food ownership and appropriation. And in Jerusalem, we deal with it a little bit by saying, you know, that you need to tread very carefully because on the one hand, you don't want to create a situation in which everybody only cooks their own food and then there's no exchange and the world has never worked like that. On the other hand, you also don't want to tread on other people's, grounds too heavily, especially since many nations have got quite a lot relying on their food culture and food traditions. So you need to take some kind of a middle ground. But I've become over the years a bit more liberal. Like I was joking about the hummus, but this is actually a serious point that I'm making. I find that we have really swayed in the other direction. People are uber careful about not cooking other people's food and feeling very sensitive about appropriation. And I published I put a picture on Instagram a couple of weeks ago, of a potato gratin. And I call it an Asian potato gratin because I used some Asian flavors like ginger and lime. So it wasn't a particular, European like Italian or French, which would have either cream or olive oil. I got like quite a lot of really negative responses about that. They're saying, that's not Asian, that's just so it's oversimplification. Not the whole of Asia is the same, and you need to be a bit more sensitive. And I go like, what do you mean? It's a shorthand on Instagram. I haven't written an article saying that all Asian cuisines are the same. And people become very, very sensitive. So I think it depends on the context. I think if there's a lot at stake for someone, then you need to be really sensitive. But if there isn't much at stake, like I post and say Asian for something which is just, rather than using 100 words, I use one, then that's fine. So we need to be a bit more kind of reasonable about it and not to be too sensitive because it goes too far.
Who are some of the cookbook authors that inspire you?
So I love Nigella, whom we've spoken about earlier. She's one of my favorite cookbook writers because she writes really well and she's funny and she takes herself seriously enough, but not too seriously. And I love people that writing is part of this. The thing is, it's not just the recipes. Like David Tanis, who is from this state, is a great recipe writer, and there's always interesting anecdotes and things that go with the recipes. And so there's tons. A pure recipe book without some kind of stories or a preamble or explanation of kind of putting giving the recipes a place is, for me, that's really important.
Hi.
Hi.
It seems that you're really inspired by your own culture. What cultural food around the world, I guess, inspires you second best?
Well, the second is so hard because I need to choose one. But so I find myself it's kind of like going so I grew up in Jerusalem, so and then I traveled over the years, and I traveled so first I was very inspired by North Africa. So I traveled a bit in Tunisia and Morocco, and I found the cuisine really very. So what inspired me by those cuisines is that they're similar but also different from the Palestinian food that much of it I had growing up and really influenced the way I cook. But also there's a lot of Jewish immigrants in Israel and in Jerusalem that have brought their food with them, and many of those are from North Africa. So I've been very inspired by those cuisines. More recently, I traveled to Southeast Asia, and I really love the cuisines of Malaysia. And the reason why I like Malaysian food so much is because it's really multifaceted, multi-layered, because you've got Chinese, Indian, and Malay, and the combinations, you get that in Singapore as well, are really, really interesting and complicated and complex, which is what I love in food. So I traveled there a few years ago, and I still love that food very much. But I always love to experience new places. So I can always discover a new place that I haven't been to.
Hi, Yotam.
Hi.
A lot of conversation about hummus, and I was thinking of my passionate love for baba ganoush, which I think is the quintessential dish because, of all the flavors in it. How do you make baba ganoush smoky and wonderful?
Yeah.
I know you have to leave out the skin because of the bitterness.
Yeah. So there's different ways to make baba ganoush. So if you have access to a grill or a barbecue, then that's the best way to do it. Essentially, the closest eggplant is so good for creating a smoky flavor because it absorbs flavor really well, but because when the skin burns, it flavors the flesh. So essentially, your mission is to burn the skin of the eggplant. That's what you want to achieve. So whether you put it on the barbecue or actually you put it on an open flame or you put it in the oven on the highest setting, you really want to get this thing to start to burn, literally, not catch fire, but kind of start to burn. And once it's done that, you want to scoop out the flesh and then drain it really well because when the water comes out, the flavors concentrate as well, and then it's not watery. But the thing is, because we don't do these things often in our kitchens, we don't burn things, so it sounds a bit counterintuitive. So people stop before they should actually stop. So I think if you don't get the smoky flavor, it's just because you weren't persistent enough. So you need to carry on until you get there.
How do you develop sources for your ingredients? I mean, I would assume at this point in London, you have a whole stable of
Supplying,
purveyors.
yeah.
And when I cook your recipes, it does take me a long time to gather the ingredients. And so what do you do and how have you managed that in London, and what guidance can you give us here in Los Angeles?
So, I mean, I'm in a very fortunate position where if you run a restaurant, then you develop relationships with purveyors from different parts of the world. So we have our Spanish supplier, we've got our Greek supplier, we've got a Japanese supplier, because that's how restaurants operate. So you get people delivering what you need. But as a home cook, it's much more difficult than that. And so the way around it is, obviously the internet is a best solution that is available at the moment, because everything is available. Really, literally everything is available online if you're willing to look for it. And then there must be, in LA, it's such a multicultural place, you would absolutely, I can guarantee, find Middle Eastern shops or Asian shops selling those particular ingredients. But this is a good opportunity to talk about something else in the book that is about those ingredients. And that is, over the years, I have to admit, I have been using tons of ingredients that are very difficult to find. But in this book, I really limited myself to 10, which was excruciating, but I managed. And those 10 ingredients are listed at the end of the book. And what I say in those 10 ingredients are, I'm just going to name a few: the za'atar and sumac that all of you have already got, and preserved lemons, and black garlic, and ground cardamom, and pomegranate molasses, and urfa chili, and maybe a couple that I forgot. And those ingredients, I write in the introduction, if you can get your hands on these 10 ingredients, then 10, because they're pantry ingredients. They've got a long shelf life, and they're not expensive. So if you get your hands on these 10 ingredients, then you can easily cook lots of the recipes from the book, because I specifically don't use a lot of hard-to-get ingredients in this book. And of course, you don't need to get all 10. You can get 5, and many of the recipes have got only just straightforward ingredients, and none of the 10 exotic ingredients. But it's a kind of like contract with the reader when I say, like, buy those 10 ingredients, and then you can cook, the whole book essentially, without having to resort to going and buying and finding those weird and wonderful ingredients that I always ask you to go and get. And like I said earlier before, if you're missing one spice, it's not the end of the world.
Okay, so outside of ingredients, are there any essential tools or equipment? On the really cheap side, maybe it wasn't even intended for the kitchen that you love to use. And then on the flip side, maybe something that's worth the investment. What are your go-tos?
I don't really use very fancy tools kit in my cooking, to be honest, and I don't really even have a fetish for expensive kit. So my kitchen's basic. I've got a food processor, I've got a blender, but you don't really have to. I mean, one of the things that I think is quite important is I use a lot is the stick blender, the one you can put in the pot, because it saves you washing up. Is that what you call it here, stick blender? Or right? I don't know. Well,
One of those. Yeah.
One of those.
Yeah.
Because it just saves you, and it's easy. So that's really good. And for me, the basic tool that I use all the time, because there's a lot of lemon juice in the book, is just a good lemon squeezer. So, and that's like my third arm. Like I always have it, because I love citrus, So that's what you need. Otherwise, I think you can cook the whole book with very basic kit, really.
Can we talk one of those ingredients that I've noticed is now appearing in salad dressings and lots of restaurants? Tahini.
Tahini.
It's becoming very popular.
It's extremely popular because it also comes from the kind of the health food world, because it's very good to use. But I have to say one thing about tahini: it needs to be really good. And like olive oil, there's a whole range of tahinis. So you need to find one that you love. And normally I like the ones that are where the sesame seeds have been toasted really well and for a long time. So they've got a slightly smoky, like good toasted sesame oil. And tahini is really essential for Middle Eastern cooking, or for any cooking as far as I'm concerned, because it's always nice to drizzle it. I put a good tahini sauce over there's a fish here, there's a chili fish here, which is to die for. It's got a simple sauce, and then when the fish has been poached in the tomato and chili sauce, you just drizzle it with tahini, and it just transforms the whole dish. It's really, really, it's a great ingredient, and I really think you should go and look for really good tahini if you haven't got one already.
Hi, kind of new to a Northern Hemisphere Christmas. Do you have any recommendations for kind of blow them out of the water Northern Hemisphere Christmas recipes?
Yeah,
Thank you.
I do, actually. there's recipes in this book, and there's also combinations at the end. For one of them is for this kind of holiday feast. But there's a really beautiful recipe for stuffed chicken in the book, and it's got a really interesting caraway and bread stuffing that really transform the whole chicken. There's some brown sugar in it. It's delicious. And on the things that to serve on the side, I've got two mashed potatoes. One is for potatoes and one is for sweet potatoes. And for both of them, they've got these dressings that go on top. And I love using either lime or lemon to put over mashed potato. And they're kind of a herby, lemony, citrusy toppings. And they would be nice to serve those side by side. So one is beautifully orange. They're actually in the book, they are side by side as well, so you can see what it looks like. And they're really easy and quick to make, both mashed potatoes, and they look very good on the table. There's two hints for you for your Christmas.
Hi there. There are so many great cookbooks that come out every single year. Why do you think Jerusalem is the one that sort of rose above them all and is in everyone's kitchen now?
So there's an assumption that I'm not 100% is true. I mean, plenty is also out there for certain people. But I think Jerusalem sparked people's imagination because of the story of Sammy and myself, and I know it's been very inspirational for people, our collaboration and our friendship. I think that really helps. And also, this is a kind of a portrait of a city. And I think these portraits are quite evocative. So if you have good recipes and a really good story, like I said earlier, that does that. So it kind of gives people hope, whether it's justified or not, I'm not going to get into, that this thing can actually work in the Middle East. And so you get delicious food and some hope. So that's a good formula, isn't it?
To your left.
There. To the right.
Hi.
That's our left.
Kind of building on that, I feel like Israeli food is totally having a moment in LA.
It does.
And I'm curious to hear your thoughts about that, and additionally, kind of where you see food and eating moving to next.
Yeah. Israeli food is definitely having its moment all over the world, and Israeli restaurants are doing really well. And I don't really know exactly how to explain this thing. I mean, there's a lot of creativity going on in Israel today, and it's so weird because 20 years ago or 30 years ago, if anyone can remember, restaurants in Israel were diabolical. It was a bit like eating in London. And apart from hummus and that, but it was restaurants were really bad. And all of a sudden, there's a kind of this splurge of creativity that has been going on, and it's really refreshing to see because there's really good food, and there's really good food on the Israeli side, but there's also a lot of creativity on the Palestinian side, but you don't see that as much for all sorts of geopolitical reasons. But it's great to see that the kind of the food of the region is becoming popular, and what I like especially about it is because it's kind of I think the northern hemisphere or the Western world has been exposed to a lot of food outside the Middle East, like Asia and India and other bits. But for some reason, this has been delayed, and now there's this kind of discovery, and I'm very happy to see it happening. About where the future is heading, I never know exactly how to answer this question because the way the world goes, it goes in roundabouts, and there's lots of factors going on. I definitely think that kind of this vegetable-focused eating is here to stay, and people are, as far as I can tell, progressively over the last decade or two, they've been eating more and more vegetables. I can see what we serve in our restaurants is more and more and more vegetables and less of the rest, which is a very good thing. But I think people are going to be a little bit less strict. So more people are going to eat, vegetables, vegetarian and vegan diets, but not all the time. I think that's what we're going to see more and more of.
Has the movement of Ethiopian Jews to Israel influenced Israeli cooking?
Not that I know of, no. I mean, there are bits of it, like pockets in a few restaurants, but there aren't really, like, there isn't a lot of like Ethiopian restaurants around, and there's a lot of Jews from Yemen in Israel that settled, and there's a lot of similarities and overlaps between those cuisines, but you see more Yemeni food than Ethiopian food, but I'm not 100% sure what is the reason for that.
Have you used that Ethiopian spice berbere at all in any of
Yeah,
your cooking?
I do. I use it. So it's a combination of spices. Actually, I only just had a column in The Guardian a few weeks ago with all recipes with using that spice mix. It's nice. It's hot and sweet at the same time. It's got chili and it's got ginger. It's got some cinnamon and cardamom. It's kind of this wonderful balance between hot and sweet that I really love.
I put it in my hummus. It gives it a
Did
little...
you? As I said, you can put whatever you like in your hummus.
It gives it a little giddy up.
Yeah.
Hi, Yotam.
Hi.
I am a member of the Facebook Housewives group.
Oh,
and
thank you.
I always say that it's the nicest 8,000 people I know on earth because it really is the most supportive group that I'm part of on Facebook.
Oh, great. Thank you.
And I have an ingredient question.
Yeah.
Here in LA, we use a lot of peppers in Asian and Mexican cuisine, different kinds of peppers.
Chili peppers, you mean?
Yes, chili peppers. And I know you use different kinds of peppers in your recipes. Can you talk about the different kinds and why you use them and what's special about those?
Absolutely. So I use one of the chilies that I use quite a lot in this book is Urfa. It's one of the 10 ingredients, and that's a Turkish pepper, and it's a bit like ancho in the sense that it's dark and warm and not very spicy. It's a bit like chocolatey in flavor, and I love it because it's really the tomato dish there on the left has got those sprinkled on top, so it's not too spicy, but it's beautiful when you sprinkle it over things. So that's one that I like using. I like using Aleppo chili, which is the kind of a slightly hotter, more red versions. And what is good about those chilies from the Middle East is that you can always get them, or mostly you can get them in chopped up or flake form, so you can add them at the end if you like. And one of the tricks that I really love doing, and that comes from Turkish cooking, is to melt butter or olive oil and then add your chilies at the very end, and then it dyes everything a beautiful red color, and to spoon that over stews or roasts or whatever it is, and it's a great thing to do, even over like poached eggs. It's so delicious.
Hi, Yotam. So maybe I'm an outlier, but we actually love the fact that your recipes are complicated and have a lot of... we have 5-year cookbooks, and the recipes that are the most challenging are the ones that also we find are the most remarkable. So thank you for that. Yeah. And my question is, when you have a special occasion to celebrate, how do you see your ideal dinner party? Do you do the complicated things, or do you make it easy and simple?
So it depends on the state of mind. I mean, I think the thing between easy and complicated is also about the context, like when for whom you're cooking, what is the occasion, and so you can make a whole complicated feast from this book if you wanted to, but also each dish can be like quite easily made on the day. So that's a choice that you've got according to what you want to achieve. But I like to do something which is a bit like that kind of Ottolenghi smorgasbord that you get when you go into one of our delis or cafes, which is to offer big platters full of food and people can kind of help themselves. So I don't make things that are super complicated. I make things that are a bit easier, but I put a lot there, so I give them a lot of options, and I think that feels quite generous, especially if I've got time. Like if I entertain for lunch on a Sunday on the weekend, I can do quite a lot of the preparation on the Saturday night, and then I spread it on the table on the Sunday lunchtime, and that's the way I love to serve food.
Hi.
Hi.
I love your cookbooks, and I love the spongy cover. It seemed like a phenomenon in the beginning to have that kind of sensual cover. How did that come about, and why is your new cookbook or last couple without that?
Without the
yeah.
So you don't get a pillow for the price of of the book as well. So the first book that had that cover was Plenty, and we did that. I don't remember exactly how it happened, but I remember having a conversation with my editor, and we said, "Oh, let's make it like soft." For some reason, this was quite a long time ago, so I don't really remember. And then it kind of became the trademark of the Ottolenghi covers. But I was kind of like in the mind that we don't need to carry on doing it forever. So in the UK where I live and you know this is where I make the books. Only Plenty has that cover, but none of the other books has a squishy cover. And here, I think a couple of more books had that cover, but then I thought like enough is enough, and then. But I can't really explain. The covers are complicated stuff because there's a lot of conversations happening, and it's a bit like naming a baby. It's like you can go on forever and ever discussing covers, and then at some point that you have to stop the conversation and just go with what you've got. And,
Let's do 2 more questions.
You mentioned earlier that you have a different management style. Can you describe a little bit about your management style?
I mean, the management style my company is actually a partnership of 4. I'm just one of 4. I'm the face, but we manage it quite collaboratively. So there's always people, like most of my books are collaborations with other people, and I always like to create those kind of collaborative environments. That's also how my test kitchen runs. People are free to come and go and offer ideas and suggest ideas. Anyone can contribute something to the mix, and that just comes natural to me. That's the way we operate, and it works to a certain extent because it creates that kind of spirit within the company. But yeah, on the one hand, I like to be in control, but on the other hand, I like people to always be included and do things together.
So people aren't running around all day saying, yes, chef, yes, chef.
No, they do not do that. I hate being called chef.
How many times do you find that you test and tweak a recipe before you feel like you're satisfied and happy with it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The range is really tremendous. The minimum number is 2 or 3. Like it's never. Even if you think it worked the first time, it feels like a fluke. So you definitely try it again another time. But the recipes sometimes, like really stubborn recipes, could take like more than a dozen tests. Like we've got these kind of mythological recipes in the test kitchen that have taken forever to perfect, and it gets quite frustrating sometimes. But some recipes are just more difficult than others to kind of hone down and kind of develop. But my recipe testing regime is like insanely complicated because we test recipes over and over again, and then once everything is tested and the recipe is ready, it goes to one person who lives in Wales with her family, and she tests the recipes at home, and then she writes a report and sends it back, and so that's like an extra stage in the recipe testing. And she's tested every recipe I've ever published.
One final question on recipes and testing. The photographs in these books are always spectacular. How many takes does it take to, do you fix it and then you shoot, or do you sometimes?
Yeah, it's funny. I find that normally the first time you put something on the plate looks the best, and after you start playing with it, it never looks as good. So I don't have a food stylist. I just do it with the photographer. We just put the food together on the plate and shoot it, and often it's quite quick, but sometimes what we do is we do a lot of takes. I like to shoot a dish at various stages. So, sometimes I take the pot. I say take it down because my test kitchen is on the what do you call it, second floor, but where we shoot is on the first floor, so it's ground floor. So we take it down in the pot, and then I try to put it in a bowl, and then I try to put it on a plate. So we do like 3 different options for every every dish, and then I choose the one that looks the best, whether it's from the big pot or the smaller dish or the platter if it's plated.
Terrific. So the book is Ottolenghi Simple. Thanks for coming to Live Talks
Thank
LA.
you. Thank you. Thank you.